Thanks everyone for joining us today for our breakfast club. And today we have with us Caleb Hurd. Tell us a little bit for those who kind of never met you speaking at QCon or KubeCon or anything in between.
I've been in technology for about 12 years now. Currently, I'm an SRE manager at Chick-fil-A. I've worked in a variety of different tech roles throughout my career. I've been a software developer. I've worked in operations.
As a disclaimer, all views, opinions are definitely personal and have nothing to do with our employers. If we were to have breakfast, I'm assuming it's going to be at Chick-fil-A.
We would definitely have it at Chick-fil-A. I would definitely get a chicken biscuit, and I would definitely put jelly on my chicken biscuit. I'm just going to put that out there.
All right, so that's going to be a breakfast that I would like to try. Off the grid, what are the stuff that keeps you busy?
I am a hobby addict, so having hobbies is my hobby. So coffee, I'm a big coffee snob. French press in the morning is my go-to. I love woodworking. I built a table not too long ago. Actually had a tree that went down in my house that I cut into boards. It's drying out that I'm going to use to refinish the dining room table I built.
The first time I heard about Chick-fil-A, other than maybe watching the signs while driving the road,
Sure.
was in the context of Kubernetes. That you actually guys thought that it made sense to put Kubernetes clusters in each and every branch. This thing became kind of to a huge use case of running Kubernetes at the edge. Were you part of this?
The guy that dreamed it up, his name's Brian Chambers. The lead architect behind it was Alex Crane. I was one of the engineers that helped build the original solution. Some of the original pieces that I brought to the table were around setting and deploying in the restaurants. We had this unique problem, and that is that we have 2,800 locations and restaurants. We're in the food business, so we have low margin. The reality of the matter is some of these restaurants just don't have access to the infrastructure they need. And frankly, it's not profitable for us to run a bunch of networking redundancy to these restaurants. So we were faced with the problem, how do you redundantly run a local workload that's self-healing, that'll continue to function if you go down for a day from a network perspective, without spending $10,000 a location. We could have done all the things that we did with Kubernetes with just Linux and traditional tooling, but we would have needed an army of engineers. And frankly, it would still probably have stability problems.
How difficult is it to operate 2,000 branches you mentioned?
Definitely difficult for sure, and it's not a problem that I'm going to pretend like we've solved entirely yet. But we're definitely getting closer to sort of solving that problem. You've got monitoring. You have to know indicators that indicate that you actually have a problem. Probably some of the more brilliant designs that the original architect built into it are around the idea that you can't really troubleshoot and solve the clusters. You just have to wipe them and start over rapidly.
If I were to ask you, project that you are proud of through your career,
one of the more recent things that I've been working on is implementing SRE practices across all teams at Chick-fil-A. And Kubernetes has been a component of that, but I'm starting to work a little bit higher than the platform itself. I'm worried about the organizational structure and convincing teams to make operational changes. Kubernetes has enabled that and powered it, but it's definitely not the only point.
You guys have a deep culture of build. Where do you cut the line between, build versus buy?
Sure.
Your thoughts about open source?
That's just my opinion. I think we sometimes lean a little more heavily into building when we could get something off the shelf. I think the reason behind that is Chick-fil-A hires unbelievably bright people, just incredibly talented individuals, and then empowers them and trusts them a lot. When you empower really smart people, one of the byproducts of that is, especially with engineers, sometimes they will like to build something that they shouldn't. So everything has a price. It's fairly easy to break the cost down. Third party, SaaS, on-prem, open source, or custom built. If a junior engineer tells me it's going to take him 10 hours to program something custom, I'll triple that. If a senior engineer tells me it's going to take him 10 hours, I'll usually quadruple that.
I read a recent blog of yours on authority and influence. Tell me and our viewers kind of about this approach on how to drive SRE culture, where in a world where culture eats strategy.
I like that, culture eats strategy. Forget Chick-fil-A for a moment, just as human beings, right? When you roll into a task, whether it's DevOps, SRE, security, QA, really any sort of supporting task that removes risk from the system that you're supporting, right? And those are all risk reduction. Those are all defense. If it was a football game, those teams are trying to stop the other team from scoring. And the reality of the matter is, same with football. If you look at where your spend goes to the quarterback, it goes to the receivers. Businesses want their defense to play optimally with as little budget as they can take.
Basically saying 10 years from now, we'll have a new role, not SRE, but SecRE.
The reason I have a job is the tooling for this field is terrible, and that includes Kubernetes. I'm sorry. It's better, right? Kubernetes has made the tooling better. When you make Kubernetes simple enough to set up, deploy, and manage for a developer to do it with 5% of their time, and you make it so ubiquitous that people ramping up on it, you teach it in school, everybody hits the market ready to rock and roll on it. I'm not going to be needed anymore if my specialty is Kubernetes. Now, I think that's great. Like, my job as an SRE is to ultimately work myself out of a job, right? And to be clear, like, businesses are insatiable. They will always have a need for an engineer to move on and work on the next problem, right? But if you get comfortable with this fact that our fields, our defensive fields, are ubiquitous, you start building around that. So let me go back and answer your original question. Instead of building this large SRE practice at Chick-fil-A, I've got 31 teams that I support. Because I view SRE as a temporary field and DevOps as a temporary field in their current form, right? I'm not saying it will die completely. I've gone out of my way to build a consultative practice that empowers teams to be self-sufficient than to build this sort of large group of engineers that I control directly, that can sort of centrally dictate or manage or support these teams.
It's time to test your emotional reflexes. 4 golden signals.
I would say only 3 matter.
4 golden signals are latency, traffic, errors, and saturation, which are part of the Bible coming from Google's SRE book. Istio.
I would say the first reaction on Istio is definitely complicated and magical.
A very trendy one, GitOps.
I would say table stakes.
Are you guys using GitOps internally or plan to or experiment with that?
It's pretty much the standard now for us.
Shifting left and DevSecOps.
I struggle with that one. I'm not convinced yet. I think the jury's out on that one.
All right, and here's one for the politicians, CNCF.
I would say exciting. We could start tackling open source in such a structured way.
How is security, friction between security, DevOps, is it an issue?
The risks associated with Kubernetes when it comes to security is that there's so much packed in there. It's very easy to poke a hole and not realize it.
Yeah.
Conceptually, if you talk about a firewall, I have to knowingly poke a porthole in that firewall and route it somewhere. And that's one layer, right? If you got a load balancer involved, maybe 2 layers. It's very easy for a person to understand what they just did. With Kubernetes, though, it's like, well, what was wrong with me assigning that access policy to this app that does this thing? And now somebody just took it over and has hopped around a cluster and done bad stuff.
Kubernetes, for good or for bad, is notoriously kind of known to be with a lot of moving parts and with a lot of knobs. Many of them are actually not tuned to be the secured option by default. It's actually tuned to be something that will work for you rather than work for you and keep you secure.
It's as much about education to the companies as it is about knowledge. And unfortunately, that education is usually gained through security violations, through experience.
I really appreciate you taking the time and chatting. It was extremely insightful and good.
No, I appreciate it. I really enjoyed my time with you guys.